Hi there, my name is Brian Boys. I'm a content specialist and also the author of How to Write a White Paper in One Day. And what I'm going to go over in this class are the 7 mistakes people make when writing white papers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first talk about what each of the mistakes are, identify them, and then I'm going to talk about maybe why people make these mistakes, what might motivate them to make the wrong choices here, and then I'm going to tell you how to solve these mistakes so you can write effective white papers. When I'm talking about mistakes, I don't mean that these are like writing mistakes, spelling something wrong or using like a goofy font. These are strategic mistakes that are hurting the effectiveness of people's white papers. So why did I pick these 7? Well, I'd like to say that I have looked at hundreds of white papers, but I have not read through hundreds of white papers. And the reason I haven't read all the way through is because right at the front, I can see things that tell me and other readers that a white paper is not going to be worth our time to read all the way through. People are being constantly bombarded with content, and they're looking for any reason they can to stop reading your white paper and then go look at something else that they think has more value. So these 7 mistakes kind of act like red flags that are telling your reader that your white paper isn't going to be worth the effort it takes to read it. But I have a little secret for you. It's kind of good news. These mistakes are really easy to fix. This is good news if you want to write white papers. And it's because the bar is kind of low for creating white papers, at least the ones that I'm familiar with in the marketing side of things, so that it means that if you can get the basics right, you have a chance of standing out from the competition. So I promise that if you can avoid these 7 deadly mistakes, your white papers will be more effective, more convincing, and more widely read. Okay, so here's the first one and the most basic. Not knowing what a white paper is. It's kind of embarrassing, right? Now here's the funny thing about human nature. In my experience, not many people are willing to admit that they don't know what a white paper is. Well, why do you think they don't know? Well, they don't know what a white paper is because they haven't really bothered to look at a definition. And I also mean that there's a lot of people that think they know what a white paper is, but actually they don't really know. There's a little bit of a mystique that surrounds white papers, and so if you've written one, people think that's kind of impressive. And again, this is really good news for those of us who know a few of the basics. Okay? Well, so what is a white paper? Well, a white paper, first of all, is a report, and that means it's supposed to have a somewhat objective point of view, and it's full of valuable information, just like an in-depth story you'd read in a reputable newspaper. But a mistake I see a lot is that marketing people don't want to release a report. They want to sell their products. So they release white papers that read like sales brochures. Secondly, a white paper has a point of view, and that means it's arguing for a specific solution to a problem. But it takes a lot of guts to clearly state an assertion. And so some people think that if they take a strong stand for one particular solution, they won't be able to say that they're in favor of another one. Exactly. A good white paper will say that we are for this and not for this other thing. And because we have expertise in this field, you should believe us. So a third thing that a good white paper always has is citations. Every time you make a bold assertion, you must back it up with something. If you have the budget to do original research, then you can cite that. But for most of us, we need to be able, we need to do this to back up our assertions by quoting authoritative sources and ones that agree with our claim. So these would be things like trade journals, published articles, books, or if you happen to know an expert, you could just call them up and get a quote. But basically, you can't just say, take my word for it. You have to have authoritative evidence that what you're advocating is true. Okay, so there are 3 basic kinds of white papers. You can probably find variations or combinations of these, but in general, white papers fall into these 3 categories. First, there's the backgrounder, This white paper is like a status report. It gives the reader a good knowledge of the current situation in some area. For example, I've seen something like this released by computer security companies. And one example gives the non-expert an understanding of the latest tactics being used by the bad guys and the best practices that companies are using to try to defend their networks. This is very valuable information for the reader, and it demonstrates the expertise of the company releasing the white paper. The list white paper is just what it sounds like. It's a list of solutions to a problem. For example, it might be 5 ways traditional sit-down restaurants can compete against delivery-only ghost kitchens. And so the points in a list paper don't have to be super closely associated, meaning they don't necessarily have to go in the order you put them. And this white paper can be very valuable for a person that has these kinds of problems. The third basic kind of white paper is the problem solution. And this is the white paper I'm most familiar with and the kind that I show you how to write in my book. In this one, you start with a single problem, talk about its ramifications, review the various solutions before landing on the best solution. And that, of course, is the one offered by your company. That's the whole purpose of the white paper. This kind of white paper is designed to be read from beginning to end. Otherwise, the reader can't skip around or they will miss the flow of the argument. So they want to take it all the way through in order. The problem solution white paper can be very effective in getting a skeptical reader to at least consider changing their mind. But it's the kind that will fall flat if you don't carefully structure your argument to lead your reader from the beginning to the end. And for this kind of white paper, here's a mistake that people make right off the bat: not picking a compelling subject, so your target reader doesn't have a strong motivation to read it. So, why do people have bland topics? Well, bland is safe. Some people find that being compelling can be a little risky, or the person writing the white paper just doesn't know what would be the most interesting or compelling thing for their reader. Either way, picking a subject that's not compelling for the person that you're trying to reach is really going to hurt the chances of your white paper being read. On the other hand, if you can write about something that your readers find really exciting, they're going to share it with their colleagues. So here's how you grab your readers' attention. First of all, you need to know who they are. So what are their highest hopes and their deepest fears? I think fears are even stronger than hopes. And in fact, I ask my clients what their prospective customers lay awake thinking about when it's 3 in the morning and they can't sleep. The next one is aim for the skeptic. And by this, I mean write to convince the person who does not agree with what you're saying. Make good arguments, back them up with authoritative citations, and even concede certain points to show that you take their objections seriously. This will make your white paper much more compelling. Teach something valuable. Make it worth the reader's time to read it. The power of a white paper is that it may be the only way to reach someone who has no intention of doing business with you. That is, they will read it only if they think they can get something out of it, if you can teach them something valuable. So hopefully you'll be writing about something where you can show your expertise, and you will be able to do this. Finally, use your reader's language. So if you're writing for experts, then use the terminology that they would use. But if you're writing for people that don't know a lot about your industry, explain it in terms that they will understand. Don't try to sound impressive by using industry lingo. This will not impress a confused reader. This will cause them to quit reading. But what if you don't know what's most compelling for your reader? No problem. That's easy to find out. Where do you find the most compelling topics? From the people who talk with your prospective readers every day. So salespeople are a great resource. They not only know who your most likely customer is, but they also know what these people find most compelling. When I talk to salespeople, I always ask about what topics get the prospective customers really interested. what makes their eyes light up. Customer service representatives can give you great insights from another angle. They're not selling to customers, they're helping them. And they can give you a really good perspective on what are hot button topics for these people. Recent customers are an incredible source for compelling topics because they can tell you why they chose your company or product, and they can tell you what compelled them to spend their money. When I have a chance to talk to these people, I always ask, if you wanted to convince a friend to try our company, what would you say to them? But even white papers that have a compelling subject can squander that opportunity to engage readers, and that's when they stumble out of the gate. They do not grab the reader's attention right at the beginning. Or we could say, looking at our friends with the van here, they don't gain traction right away. You've probably started reading a book or an article where the author takes a long time to get to their point. In copywriting, we call this throat clearing. The problem is that with today's short attention spans, a typical reader isn't going to hang around to see what you have to say next. They're going to be on to the next thing. So, why do some people ease into their argument at the beginning of their white paper? Well, they might think that it doesn't sound sophisticated to begin with the bold statements, and white papers are kind of supposed to be formal, or they're trying to stretch their copy. Some people think that the longer their white paper, the more impressive it will be. Maybe they're being paid by the word. Well, the reader who ends up skimming the white paper won't feel that way. Or maybe the person writing the white paper just doesn't know how to write a strong start. Whatever the reason, if you don't hook the reader in the first few seconds, you probably won't get them to read all the way through. So knowing this, you have to keep in mind that each section of your white paper has one main job, and that is to get the reader to continue to the next part of your white paper. So your headline or title has to make them want to read your summary statement. And your summary statement has got to whet their appetite for the first paragraph, and so on. It's like a chain with one link leading to another, and the whole thing is only as strong as the weakest link. There's a great rule for grabbing and keeping a reader's attention. It's called the 3-33 rule, and it's really simple. Basically, it's this. Your reader will initially give you about 3 seconds. They will spend this scanning your title, your white paper title. If they find it interesting, they're likely to give you 30 more seconds. They will probably spend this reading your first few paragraphs. If they like where your white paper is going, then they're going to give you probably 3 more minutes of reading. And if you have their full attention by this point, at the end of those 3 minutes, chances are they're going to read your white paper all the way to the end. Now, the point is that people are willing to risk small amounts of attention before they're willing to invest larger periods of their time. So you have to deliver the goods by showing them right up front that their attention is worth it. Unfortunately, this is difficult to do if your white paper does not have the structure they are expecting. Hollywood, I guess I should back up and say that not having a clear structure means that your reader isn't quite sure where you're going with your argument. And I was going to say that in Hollywood, they have discovered this with movies. There's like this formula with the way movies are told. And it doesn't mean that people want to be able to guess the ending to every movie right away. It just means that they want the story told in a way that they expect. So a familiar structure helps them make sense of the narrative. And it's the same thing for white papers. At the beginning, you need to be clear to the reader where you're going with your argument. And then, of course, you need to take them there. Well, a lot of white papers don't do this. I've read plenty that have an interesting subject, and they start off well, but then they just seem to jump from point to point, and the arguments don't build on each other. So, as the reader, I am not becoming increasingly convinced of their point. Now, why do some people do this? It might be that they have a bunch of points to include in their white paper, and so they just fit them in whether or not they build logically from one to the next. This can happen when a white paper is written by a committee. Everybody gets to contribute, and too many cooks spoil the soup. Or a white paper writer simply may not know how to use a good structure. They may be a good writer, but they just kind of let their thoughts flow and hope, that the reader makes the connection. Well, this makes for, very entertaining journaling, but it does not make for good white papers. To have an effective white paper, one that could change the mind of a reader, you need to lead them on a journey. So you must introduce them to a topic in a way that will make it very important to their success, because you're their guide. And as their guide, you're going to teach them about the problem that's causing them to read your white paper. So you must educate them on its causes and ramifications. You can't assume that they understand those clearly. And then finally, you need to lead them to your conclusion. Because you're the guide, you have to act like you know the way that the way to take them. And so simplified to the extreme, a white paper has a beginning, a middle, and an end that all make sense for the readers. It's basically like a map for them, and I think that's a great analogy for a white paper, because not only does a map show the reader a complete picture of of where they're going, but it also gives them a good understanding of kind of how the various parts of where they're going work together. So if I was planning a trip to your city and I needed to use all kinds of different transportation to get to my destination, I would be very interested in a custom map that you would make for me, especially if it gave me detailed information about where to start, what I need to know to get from point to point, and then finally, how to find my final destination and how to identify my final destination. So like a map, a white paper is valuable when it helps me to accomplish something that I really want to do. But simply having a good structure isn't enough. Your white paper will not be effective if it doesn't answer the questions that people really want to know about. A report, which is what a white paper is, looks at all sides of an issue. You don't want to leave an elephant in the room. Well, there are a number of reasons that people do not want to include these burning questions in their white paper. First of all, they might think that the point of a white paper is to sell, and in sales, you purposefully avoid difficult or awkward questions. In fact, you don't bring them up on purpose. Or it may be that a white paper writer doesn't know their audience very well, and so they just actually don't know what the burning questions are, or what their reader, the things that their reader really want to know about. And then finally, a white paper writer just may not bring up tough questions because they don't know how to answer them. And for example, if the solution, your product that you're proposing costs 10 times as much as competing products that pretty much do the same thing, and you can't justify that in some way, then a topic like price is one that you probably just don't want to bring up. But here's the problem with not bringing up these questions, is that your reader is most likely skeptical about your solution, and you can't win them over unless you answer the questions that are making them doubt you. Now here's another example, here's another advantage to you bringing up the tough questions, because if there's a kind of tough question about my product or company and I bring it up, that means I get to frame the question and I get to set up the question so that I can answer it in the way that's most advantageous to me. And so, if somebody else, if a competitor is bringing up the tough question, I'm not going to get that chance. I don't get the chance to frame it and give the best possible answer. So it really behooves you to find out what the toughest questions are and then learn the best answers for them. And not only will this bring skeptical readers over to your side, but it will ensure that your white paper gets read by more people. So if you purposely bring up the toughest questions that people are asking about your solution, it's going to make your white paper more authoritative, more significant, and more useful, and that will motivate people to share it. Your dream scenario would be to have someone to take a printed copy of your white paper into a meeting and use it as evidence for why their organization should follow what you're recommending. There's much more chance of this happening if you look at an issue from all sides, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But there's another kind of question that you need to take into account that readers often wonder about that, and that is, who wrote this report? In my opinion, it's a mistake not to give a white paper an author. As I keep reminding you, it's a report. And a report usually has someone's name attached to it. It can have several authors like a scientific paper, but I strongly suggest that you sign authorship to your paper. Well, so why wouldn't you put someone's name on your white paper? Why don't people do this? And I can understand there's probably a number of reasons that they're hesitant too. First of all, a white paper is often used as a marketing piece, and so most marketing pieces don't identify who wrote them. Web pages, brochures, press releases, sales sheets, product guides, we're used to seeing all of these marketing pieces without an author's name on them. Or it could be that they don't want to put an author's name on there because they don't want to give attention to somebody who's not the company's CEO. Like in press releases, it's always the top executives who are quoted, and maybe the person who wrote the white paper is a lower level employee, and it just doesn't seem right to give them the kind of attention that should be going for upper level executives. And then finally, and I think this is the case most of the time, companies just don't know that they should assign an author. In my experience, white paper best practices are not widely known, and so this is just one of the things that people don't know what to do. But by identifying the author, you do get two big advantages. So first of all, if you have an expert in your group who you can assign the authorship to, that will give a lot of credibility to your white paper. And I'm thinking of an example from an aviation technology company. I was reading their white paper, and I turned and I just was curious about who wrote it, and the author, or one of the authors, was their chief technology officer. And so as I'm reading this white paper, I'm thinking, wow, this is the guy who would know the highest level stuff, would know everything, be very authoritative on what this white paper is covering. So that really impressed me and kind of elevated the white paper in my view. But let's see on the other hand, let's say you don't have someone who's a great authority, but you'd like to bolster somebody's authority, and that's another great reason to put their name on it. If you make someone the author of one or more white papers, it's a great way to establish their authority. You can, a couple white papers and you can kind of come across as an expert. And if they're being interviewed or they're being quoted, they can always mention that they're the author of such and such a white paper, and that's gonna up their credibility. I really encourage people who want to make themselves into recognized authorities in their field to start writing white papers. So, all right. So let's say you're great with that. You're going to assign an author, but you have several people on your team to choose from. So who should you pick? Well, for authorship, I would pick the person who is going to sound the most believable to the reader. And I know this may not be the person who's done the most work, but you need to put egos aside here for this one. If I pick up your white paper, am I going to be more interested in hearing from a marketing staffer or the VP of research? And by the way, also, you need to be honest about authorship. So make sure that the person who will be listed as an author has worked in some way on the white paper. Make sure that they've read it carefully, that they agree with what it says, and that they could comfortably discuss its contents. Okay, we're almost done. We are down to number 7 on our list. And number 7 is one of the biggest mistakes people make when writing white papers is being too afraid to do it in the first place. Now you're saying, hey, wait a minute, that's cheating. Your mistakes are supposed to be by people who've written white papers. They're not supposed to happen before they write one. And yes, I freely admit I cheated a little bit here. But I have to tell you that even a mediocre white paper is better than none at all. So not writing one is a huge mistake. Well, why are people afraid to try writing white papers? I can speak from personal experience. If someone had asked me to write one back when I did not know what a white paper was, I would have been afraid of looking like an idiot. A white paper sounds impressive, and so doing a bad job on one would be really embarrassing. I think people who would like to write a white paper and don't have two big hurdles to overcome. And so first of all, they don't know what a white paper is, so they need to learn the basics of the format, the tone, and the structure. And then second, they don't know that writing one is actually fairly simple. And by that I mean, yes, it's a lot of little steps, but each of those in itself is not that difficult. But no matter how many books you've read and video courses you've taken on white papers, there's still that fear of trying. So I say that writing your first white paper takes a little courage. Now remember that courage is not the lack of fear, but it's rather acting in spite of your fear. So you acknowledge that it's going to be difficult, and then you just start doing it. Don't let your fear of not doing it perfectly the first time keep you from writing that white paper. It's like the time I did something called the polar plunge. So here in Oregon, and I don't know if you can see there's a map of Oregon back here behind me, that's where I am. We have a charity that helps people with mental disabilities, and they raise money by having people jump into a local river in the middle of winter. So they raise money because you tell your friends, hey, I'm going to jump into the cold river. How much will you sponsor me to do this? And then you can't back out because then the charity wouldn't get your money. But and your friends are like, that's the craziest thing. I'll give you 20 bucks. I'll give you 50 bucks. And believe me, when you're standing on the bank of the river about to jump in, it seems like the craziest thing in the world. You're going, why on earth did I sign up to do this? Because it's done in late January, early February. It's generally been freezing that morning. The water is 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 7 degrees Celsius. If you've ever been in water like that, your limbs start to go numb within a few seconds. And then, so you're standing there, and these groups of people are going in, and you see the group right ahead of you go plunging and screaming into the cold water, and all you can think is, I can't believe I'm going to do this. And then seconds before you're up at the line, it's time for your group to go in, you're like, I can't believe I'm going to do this. And then finally, they blow the whistle, and you and your crazy friends go running down the beach, screaming into the freezing water, and your mind is thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this. And what I found is that the only way to do the polar plunge and not chicken out is to just set your legs in motion regardless of how you're thinking about it at the moment. Regardless of what your feelings and emotions are, you just do it. And the amazing thing is that the harder you go at it, the better. In fact, if you just go crazy and you go at it as hard as you can, I found that you're halfway back out of the water before your brain has fully realized what you have just done. And so I think if you're anxious about writing your first white paper, you just do it like I did the polar plunge. Don't let your brain talk you out of it. Just jump in and do it. That's the end of the lesson. I hope you got something out of this. I would love to get comments or questions from you down in the comments section. If it's a general question, I probably can't edit your white paper for you, but if it's something that might be of use to everybody, I would love to answer it down there. And I really appreciated you watching this video. We'll talk to you soon.